Up next on Beyond the Clef, I have Jeff Grogan, and we're going to be talking about his time here at SMSC 2019, the guest clinician, and some of the clinics that he's going to tease for us on that, and his time with youth orchestras in New Jersey, and then also going to finish up with his transition from the band world to the orchestra world. That's all coming up next on Beyond the Clef.
Beyond the Clef is presented by Director's Choice.
All right, so I'm here with the featured clinician for TODA, Jeff Grogan. Thank you so much for being on the program.
It is a pleasure. I'm remembering back to our camp days together at Texas Tech. I knew you from somewhere, and so it's great to put those pieces of the puzzle back together.
Yeah, I was just a new college student, and so that's really great that you connected. I did not have any idea. Of course,
sometimes they're a blur.
Yeah. So of course you're now the director of orchestral activities at the Oklahoma City Bass School of Music. Did I get all that right?
That's correct.
Great, cool. So tell me a little bit about what you do there.
I conduct the orchestra.
That's easy enough.
Have some graduate students that are fantastic, and then I just spend a lot of time on the road recruiting for the school and trying to give the students the best experience possible so they can go out and teach or perform to the best of their ability.
All right, cool. Well, and you're not just in Oklahoma City, but also across the nation. You've been doing all sorts of interesting things. And in New Jersey, I think you were telling me you were doing 3 youth orchestras in New Jersey?
New York and New Jersey.
Okay,
New York
great.
City and New Jersey.
Tell me about your involvement with those programs and which programs.
Just over a period of a couple of years, I started with the New Jersey Symphony. It's their education conductor. It's kind of like a resident conductor position. Did 40 concerts or so a year with the orchestra. And then they had a youth orchestra. Then I got another youth orchestra in New York City, and then another youth orchestra called the New Jersey Youth Symphony in New Jersey. And all of those, they would have 10 to 14 orchestras that sort of fed up into the top group. And I was artistic director over each of those organizations, and it was the dream job of a lifetime.
Wow.
So much fun.
And it's always so fun. I've been involved with our local youth orchestra that is much smaller than those, but it's always great to see another facet of music education. I'll say private because it's a more or less it's not a public school situation, but it's always so cool because we can serve those kids in a very specific way. And for instance, in my district, unfortunately, there is no orchestra program yet, and my kids can be served and be a part of a full orchestra.
Yeah.
So.
And a lot of the students, we had pretty rigid rules around students being a part of their school program as a requirement to participate in our program. Because
I feel like that's key.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, some students were homeschooled,
of course, yeah,
or went to private school, and that was all fine. But it really helped us a lot, and I think is the key to making it a community effort. Because when you bite the hand that feeds you, and you just want all those people to be working together for the students and not create animosity.
So what advice do you have for other orchestras? You obviously had a lot of success in getting students involved in the program, and it was a large youth orchestra program. What advice do you have for instance for maybe my situation in our local area to try to bolster our numbers and get more kids involved?
In the youth orchestra?
Mm-hmm.
So, the students that choose typically to participate in youth orchestra are in 27 different activities, right? They're so smart. They're really working hard on the academic side of things. They're trying to be the best musician they can be for their school group. So they're very busy. So I think the key is that every week is transformative. And so those rehearsals have to be amazing. I think the textbook, the repertoire has to be amazing. Something that's going to make those 2.5, 3 hours once a week something that they have to it's a huge sacrifice, but it has to be compelling and life-changing every week in order for them to volunteer that time.
And how does that translate to the younger group to get them in to continue up and advance?
Same thing. It's just, you have this one shot a week, which is different than sort of the pacing in a lot of school programs. When I taught public school in Texas, it was every day, for a solid almost hour. And it was a different kind of pacing than this one shot a week. So I mean, you're hoping it's more advanced students, typically the ones who are really eager, who have floated to the top of their own programs. And so going at a trajectory and at a rate that's really high speed, high velocity, challenging, but also super rewarding.
So tell me about some of the other programs you've been involved with. I'm sure you work with students across the country, but also you work with some professional groups as a guest conductor. Tell me about those experiences.
Sure, and most of that happened in New York when I was there. Of course, with New Jersey Symphony, that those musicians were amazing orchestra. I did a lot of freelance work also in New York, like Little Orchestra Society, Adelphi Chamber Orchestra, and then did some recording sessions. Like Mark O'Connor has these method books, and he would bring in people from all over the country, and I would conduct those studio recordings, and I was never bored, always doing that. But my work with young people that's the thing I feel most passionate about and love spending most of my time doing.
It's different when they're professionals, a little bit.
Sure,
different atmosphere.
Well, and transitioning for me into the professional world, because I had been a teacher forever, it's different. It's a different. I lived for rehearsals, and they live for performances. The rehearsal is a necessary evil. Be efficient. Let's fix this. Tighten up that. And then the concert is where they let it rip. With students, concerts are great and all, but all the amazing life-changing moments usually happen in the rehearsals, and that's so much fun. But that's a big difference,
Now, I must ask you. I feel like we're close enough that I can ask you this.
Oh no!
Is there a requirement of the length of hair for professional orchestra teachers and conductors? Because I feel like that's a trend.
Listen, I'm telling you.
Do y'all get together at your little club and?
My wife likes it longer. I like it shorter.
Okay.
I cut it short from time to time, and I feel the heat. So.
Yeah.
And then I also get busy. I mean, I've gone straight for like a month and a half without being at home, and so I haven't.
Sorry, of course our listeners are listening to this coming out whenever they get
it's
it, but
so
for me this is the 10th this is the 10th interview. I'm getting a little sillier, but
it's okay. It's okay. I think it's fun.
So you are like I said earlier in the interview, the guest clinician for TODA here at SMSE 2019 when we're filming this, and you've been doing a lot of clinics.
Yes.
Can you tell me about your clinics that you're doing for us, and then kind of give us an overall picture of what they're about?
Sure. I mean, the basic gist of all my clinics is how to make sure that the factory work doesn't stay factory work. There's always some sort of musical inspiration behind everything that we're doing in rehearsals or with students, even when we're tightening things up, cleaning things up, working on precision, that there's always an artistic end to that. So even when you're doing that, somehow being inspiring, because we all know that you have to have that to keep the students focused. Focus is difficult, especially various age, but I mean, when students are really focused, they are really good. And when they're not quite focused, that goes away. It's not as powerful. So you want them to be as focused as you can make them all the time. But all of those things mostly center around conducting. And I've noticed with the younger generation, we have these conducting workshops all over the country, and they sometimes fill up in 5 minutes now, where that used to not be the case. Because I think with the younger generation of teacher, it's become even more important. Possibly because when you conduct with your ensemble, that's a moment where you can share and that inspiration can come through. And if you're really good at that, I think it takes the level of the group to the next level because they're inspired. And conducting is a great vehicle. You could save yourself a lot of time in rehearsal by being a better conductor. And so I think more and more people are finding that as a great vehicle to express how they feel about the music with their students.
We were talking about that in an earlier podcast that, we learned so much in college. It's just the basics, but it's assumed, I think now, that once you get out into the world and you start teaching, you do not know everything. It's impossible. But a lot of people shut off, and then they start to prioritize, and I gotta learn how to tune this string, or I have to learn how to teach clarinet embouchure, or how to get my 7th grade boys to sing this,
That's the craft part, right?
Yeah, so they focus on that, but then conducting goes to the wayside. And that's always something that I talk about with my student teachers going in. They have to prioritize what they're doing because it gets in the way a lot of times if it's poor, but also, like you said, it saves time.
It's interesting in these workshops, and even when I'm doing clinics with groups, middle school, high school, whatever, when the group plays by themselves, it's almost always better than it is with a conductor. And you have them play, but all of a sudden so many things fix themselves
every time.
And it's not that we get in the way a lot.
Right.
There are times they need us. Transitions, changes. If things are rushing, we can try to help to pull things back or help. But a lot of times we're just in there flapping away, and that causes usually more damage than if we weren't there at all. So I always tell my students, I say, all right, so before we start, I just want you to know the orchestra, the band, whatever you're conducting is going to sound better without you. So what is it that you're going to do as a conductor to stay out of the way and be there when you need to be, and then be out of their way when you need to be out of their way? And I think that's most of the battle for teachers and conductors.
Right. So if you are talking to first year, third year, second year teacher, anything around that area, what advice do you have for them to improve on their craft of conducting specifically?
I'm just going to take sort of there's usually two or three things that we spend almost all of our time on in these conducting workshops. And one of them is just to have sort of an artistic goal. I mean, there's music that just sort of plods along, but you have to sort of bring your artistry to it. A simple melody, if it just goes along, it can be pretty boring. But to bring just a little bit of life to that, just the shape, the way it starts, the way it peaks in the middle, some sort of phraseology to it, to have an artistic idea about every measure in the piece, I think is our duty. And then as conductors, our job is to sort of get that across. I know when I was teaching middle school band, I started sort of backwards. I think in my mind, we worked on technique and metronome, and it was only sort of the factory work for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. And just right before contest, maybe we had a little special item. And that was so counterintuitive to me. And when I flipped it and had the artistic vision, the excitement, the energy, the color, the possibilities in there from the beginning as they learned it, I found that we had a much quicker trajectory. Oftentimes when I address artistic things, the technical things automatically fix themselves, And my teachers always told me that when I was young, and I was like, no, that's not possible. But I've seen it over and over again, especially with all states, or all regions. You have 2 days to turn it around. It's got to be fast. So,
you mentioned you started your career in the band world.
I did.
And then now you are the director of orchestral activities. There was a transition period in there. You said before we started recording that you switched to the dark side. Tell me about that and kind of the struggles you faced.
My band friends say that.
Oh, okay.
Let's be clear.
What do your orchestra friends say?
Thank you for joining our team.
Welcome to the club.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know. I when I was in 4th grade, this movie called Star Wars came out. And, I grew up in a very small town in Texas, no musicians in my family. And the only way to relive the movie back in those days was to buy the record, the soundtrack on the recording, for the recording of them, and try to relive it in your head, with no replay or videotape or anything like that. So as a 4th grader, I bought this record and I was listening to it for 3 hours a night. My parents thought I was insane. And then I started conducting to it. So I knew, I wanted to be a musician at that point in my life because I enjoyed that. Somebody said, hey, you should listen to Holst, The Planets, and check out Shostakovich. I was like, wow, these guys got a lot of good ideas from John Williams. So it was pretty, that's how I sort of got thrust into this. But band was my life. I taught public school for 2 years in Texas, and then at University of Michigan and Baylor, doing the marching band, actually. And during my time at Baylor, I conducted the Waco Youth Symphony and got to work with the orchestra there on some really great repertoire, Mahler 2, Beethoven 9. I mean, some of the greats. And I just fell in love with it. And then an opportunity came for me to do a 1-year position at Ithaca College as their orchestra conductor. And then I got the job there after that. And that was it. I was an orchestra conductor after that. So,
so what instrument do you start with?
French horn.
Okay.
Well, trombone for a year, then
Okay.
French horn.
Yeah. And then how does that, what difficulties do you think you have going over into the non-wind world at all when you're playing? I mean, when they're playing.
Into the string world, you mean?
Yeah.
It's actually, it's so much clearer to teach because you see it. You can see the mistakes as they're happening. When there's a problem, you know, there's so many things you can't see going on inside of here that you're just trying to guess or explain to the students. And with the string players, it's so easy to see. From a student standpoint, it's really easy to explain. From a teacher standpoint, it's easy to watch. You can close your ears and watch the orchestra, and you can see the problems. So, in a way, it's just physics.
That's cool.
I mean, this left hand's a whole different thing, but a lot of the ensemble things in orchestra has to do with that right hand bow stuff. So,
right.
And I learned from a lot of great people too. You know, soaked it up and watched them do their thing.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being on the program.
Absolutely.
And giving us these tidbits. I'm also a fellow fan of Star Wars. Of course, there's so many people out there, but actually, dirty secret that I don't think anybody really knows. I actually started my podcast world with Star Wars. A couple of years ago,
Really?
I was a guest on a friend's little Star Wars podcast. I was like, hey, I could do this. I should do this for a band. So that's kind of where it started. And I'm sure now there's a bunch of people that are going to be going out there and Googling my name and something. So I'll let you find it on your own. But it was kind of dorky, but I love it.
I was working with the National El Sistema Orchestra, preparing it for Dudamel last week in L.A., and I snuck off for an afternoon to experience Galaxy's Edge.
Yes.
And life-changing, but we'll talk about that off camera.
Yeah.
I'll share my experience.
All right. Thank you so much. This is Jeff Grogan, and thank you so much for being on the program. It's been fantastic.
Great to see you again.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Beyond the Clef. For more great content, subscribe on our website at beyondtheclef.com. And be sure to follow us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and Facebook.